The first thing you need to understand about Red Basin is that nobody goes there on purpose. It sits in the armpit of the Montana Territory, wedged between stone ridges that cut the sky like broken teeth. The wind doesn't blow through Red Basin. It lives there, making a home in the canyons and ravines, howling through the nights like something that died angry and never quite figured out how to stop. In summer, the heat bakes the dirt until it cracks. In winter, the cold comes down so hard it could split bone. Caleb Varn had been there 11 years. His cabin sat at the western edge of the basin, tucked against a limestone cliff that gave shelter from the worst of the wind. It wasn't much. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney that smoked when the wind shifted wrong, one window facing east so he could see sunrise when the clouds permitted it. The roof leaked in 3 places. He'd meant to fix it every spring for the past 6 years. He never did. There were reasons men came to places like Red Basin. Some were running from the law, some from debt, some from women, or God, or themselves. Caleb never told anyone which one applied to him, and nobody asked. That was the unspoken agreement out here. Your past stayed buried as long as you didn't dig into anyone else's. Most mornings started the same. Up before dawn, coffee so strong it could strip paint. Check the trap line that ran 8 miles in a rough loop through the foothills. Skin whatever he'd caught. Stretch the pelts. Eat something that barely qualified as food. Sleep when the work was done. It was a life stripped down to function, and that suited him fine. The town, if you could call it that, was 15 miles south. A trading post called Mercer's, a saloon that doubled as everything else, and maybe 20 people on a good day. Caleb went down once a month to trade pelts for supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, tobacco. He'd hand over his furs, take what he needed, and leave before anyone tried to make conversation. The owner, a gray-haired man named Dutch Mercer, had given up trying to be friendly after the first year. "You're a hard man to know, Varn," Dutch had said once, counting out pelts. "I'm not trying to be known," Caleb replied. That had been the extent of their relationship for a decade. But the thing about living alone in a place like Red Basin, you start noticing things, small things, the way the light hits different in October, how the crows gather before a storm, where the deer move when winter's coming early. You learn the rhythms of the land because your life depends on it, and after enough years, those rhythms become a language you speak without thinking. So when things started changing that November, Caleb noticed. It began with the trap line. 3 days in a row, he found traps sprung but empty. No animal, no tracks, nothing. Just sprung. That didn't happen. Animals were stupid sometimes, but nature had a pattern. Random didn't exist out here. Then the deer vanished. He'd spent a full day glassing the eastern ridges where they usually bedded down for winter. Nothing. Not a single one. Deer didn't just leave. Not all at once. Not without reason. The silence came next. It started subtle, a thinning of sound that you didn't notice until it was gone. No ravens calling, no wind through the pine needles. Even the mice that lived in the cabin walls went quiet. Caleb sat on his porch one evening, smoking his pipe, and realized he couldn't hear anything except his own breathing. That was wrong. He checked his rifle that night, cleaned it, loaded it, set it by the door. He told himself it was routine maintenance. He knew better. The first time he saw them was 3 weeks before the snow came. He'd been checking the northern section of the trap line, moving quiet through a stand of aspen, when he spotted boot prints in the soft dirt near Kettle Creek. Fresh. Maybe an hour old. He knelt, studying them. 2 men, maybe 3. Heavy prints, carrying weight. They'd stopped here, milled around, then moved west toward the deeper canyons. Caleb followed the tracks for half a mile before losing them on a rocky slope. He stood there in the trees, scanning the ridgeline, and felt the weight of eyes on him. He didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything. But the feeling sat heavy in his gut, the same feeling he used to get in a different life, in different places, when danger was close and moving closer. He went home, barred the door, and didn't sleep much. The next morning, someone had been at his cabin. Not inside, he'd have heard that. But the dirt around the porch had fresh prints. Someone had stood there, maybe 20 feet from the door, watching. Just watching. The prints led off toward the south, then disappeared into the scrub. Caleb stood in his doorway, rifle in hand, staring at those tracks. "All right," he said to no one. "We doing this then?" The wind gave no answer. He started carrying the rifle everywhere after that, not slung over his shoulder, in his hands, ready. He moved quieter, watched longer, and stopped doing anything predictable. The trapline could wait. The pelts could wait. Survival came first, and survival meant not being where someone expected you to be. He'd learned that lesson 23 years ago in a place called Copper Ridge, and he'd learned it the hard way. Armatek. The gang rode into Red Basin on a Tuesday. Caleb didn't see them arrive, but he heard about it from Dutch when he made his monthly run to Mercer's. The old man looked rattled, something Caleb had never seen before. 7 of them, Dutch said, voice low, even though they were alone in the trading post. Rode in yesterday. Mean-looking bunch. Asked about who lives up in the basin. Caleb set a bundle of pelts on the counter. What'd you tell them? Told them the truth. Handful of trappers. Nobody worth bothering. Dutch paused. They didn't believe me. They say what they want? Didn't have to. That kind of man wants the same thing everywhere, whatever he can take. Dutch glanced toward the door, then back. You should clear out, Varn. Head north for a few weeks. Let them pass through. Caleb didn't answer. He took his supplies, double the ammunition, half the tobacco, and loaded his pack. Varn, Dutch said. I'm serious. These boys aren't drifters. They're organized. They got a leader, fellow named Gaines. Heard stories about him down in Wyoming. I'll handle it. You can't handle 7 men. Caleb looked at him. Really looked at him. Dutch's expression shifted. Something in Caleb's eyes made him step back slightly, unconsciously. I'll handle it, Caleb repeated quietly. He rode out before Dutch could argue. They came to his cabin 4 days later. Caleb was on the ridge above, glassing the valley, when he spotted them. 7 riders moving in a loose formation, spread out like they'd done this before. Professional. Deliberate. They weren't drifters or opportunists. They were hunters. And they'd marked him as prey. He watched them approach the cabin. 1 dismounted, kicked in the door. 2 others circled around back. The rest stayed mounted, rifles ready, watching the tree line. Good tactics. Someone had trained them. The one who'd kicked in the door emerged, shook his head. The leader, Gaines probably, said something Caleb couldn't hear. They laughed. One of them pissed on the porch. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger. Anger was hot, reactive, stupid. This was colder, older. It was the same feeling he'd had the last time he'd killed a man, back when killing men was something he did often enough to be good at it. He'd buried that part of himself when he came to Red Basin, buried it deep. But graves are shallow things when you dig them yourself. He stayed on the ridge until they left, watching them ride south toward Devil's Cut. When they were gone, he went down to the cabin. The door hung crooked on its hinges. They'd torn through his supplies, taken what they wanted, scattered the rest. His bedroll was slashed. The table was overturned. They'd even shot his coffee pot, just for meanness. Caleb stood in the middle of the wreckage, holding his rifle, and made a decision. He was done running. The thing about violence is that it has a grammar, a structure. Most people don't speak it fluently. They stumble through it, panicked and clumsy, relying on rage or fear to carry them through. But Caleb had learned the language young, in hard places, under men who taught through pain and repetition. He'd forgotten none of it. That night, he didn't sleep in the cabin. He sat up in the rocks above it, wrapped in a blanket, watching. Sure enough, 2 of them came back near midnight, checking to see if he'd returned. They moved sloppy, drunk probably, talking loud enough for Caleb to hear them from 60 yards away. Nobody here, like I told you. Gaines wants to be sure. Old man's probably halfway to Canada. They poked around for 10 minutes, then left. Caleb waited another hour, then moved. He knew these hills better than his own heartbeat. Every game trail, every draw, every place where the stone broke in ways that created natural funnels. He knew where the echoes carried and where sound died. He knew which routes they'd take because he'd have taken them himself. By dawn, he was in position. Devil's Cut was a narrow canyon that opened into the wider basin, the only easy route through the western ridges. If the gang wanted to move further into the territory, they'd come through here, and when they did, they'd be boxed in by stone walls 40 feet high, with exactly one way out. Caleb settled into a cleft in the rocks on the northern wall, 20 feet up, with a clear view of the canyon floor. He had water, He had jerky. He had 60 rounds for the rifle and a revolver for close work. He had patience. He'd been there 2 hours when he heard horses. They came in loose formation again, not bunched up, but close enough. 6 of them this time. One must have stayed back at their camp. They moved careful but not paranoid, talking amongst themselves, rifles across their saddles. Caleb let them get halfway through the canyon before he fired. The shot cracked through the narrow space like a thunderclap. The lead rider, a big man with a red beard, jerked sideways and fell. His horse bolted. The others scattered, shouting, trying to locate the shooter. Caleb worked the bolt, acquired his second target, fired. Another man down. Now they knew which direction. Rifles came up. Bullets sparked off the rocks near Caleb's position, but the angle was bad for them, shooting up at an elevated target in broken stone. He shifted position, came up 15 feet to the left, fired again. 3 down. The remaining 3 broke for cover, 2 behind a boulder pile, 1 behind his dead horse. They were pinned, and they knew it. The canyon walls turned their shouts into overlapping echoes, made it impossible to coordinate. "Who the hell are you?" one of them screamed. Caleb didn't answer. He reloaded, counted to 30, then fired at the edge of the boulder where he'd seen movement. Rock chips exploded. Someone yelped, "We'll pay you, whatever you want." Still no answer. The silence, Caleb had learned long ago, was its own weapon. It made men think. Thinking made them scared. Scared made them stupid. One of them broke, tried to run for his horse. Caleb dropped him before he made 10 yards. 2 left. He waited. Let the minutes stretch. Let them imagine what came next. "Listen," one of them finally shouted. "This is a mistake. We thought the cabin was abandoned." Caleb shifted position again. Found a new angle. Saw a boot heel sticking out from behind the boulder. He fired. The scream echoed for a long time. The last man stayed quiet. Smart. He was the one behind the dead horse. Good cover, bad position. Couldn't see Caleb, but Caleb could wait him out. Eventually, thirst or panic would move him. It took 3 hours. When the man finally tried to run, Caleb put a round through his leg. He went down screaming. Caleb climbed down from the rocks, rifle ready, and approached. The man was young, maybe 25, face pale, leg bleeding bad. He stared up at Caleb with wide, terrified eyes. "Please," he gasped. "Please, I'll leave. I'll never come back, I swear." Caleb looked at him, looked at the bodies scattered across the canyon floor, looked at the blood soaking into the dirt. "Where's Gaines?" he asked quietly. "South Camp. 1.5 miles. Please." "The other man with him?" "Just one. Big fellow. They're waiting for us to—" The man's voice cracked. "They're waiting." Caleb nodded slowly. He raised the rifle. Wait! I told you what you—" The shot cut him off. Caleb stood there in the settling silence, surrounded by the dead, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just the cold, practical awareness that 5 men had tried to hurt him, and now 5 men were gone. He'd deal with the remaining 2 before sunset. God, he found their camp just where the wounded man had said, a shallow depression near a dried-up creek bed sheltered by cottonwoods. 2 horses, 1 tent, a fire burning low. Caleb approached from downwind, moving through the scrub with the patience of someone who'd done this before, many times before. He could see them now, 2 men. One matched Dutch's description of Gaines, tall, lean, scarred face, the kind of hard competence that came from surviving things that killed other people. The other was massive, easily 6.5 feet, built like he'd been carved from stone. They were arguing. Should have been back by now. They're fine, probably drunk somewhere. All 5? At once? You worry too much. Caleb settled into position 40 yards out, behind a deadfall. He had a clear shot at both of them. Could end this in 2 seconds. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way Gaines moved, careful, aware, constantly scanning. A man like that didn't go down easy, and if Caleb's first shot wasn't perfect, he'd have a real fight on his hands. The big one looked slow, but tough. 2 rounds minimum to put him down, maybe more. Caleb had 14 rounds left in the rifle. Plenty. But, the word hung in his mind, and he couldn't quite pin down why. Then Gaines turned, looked directly at the deadfall where Caleb was hidden, and smiled. "You planning to shoot, old man, Or are we going to talk about this? Caleb's blood went cold. The big one was already moving, circling wide to flank. Gaines hadn't even reached for his gun, just stood there, hands loose at his sides, still smiling. I knew someone got my boys, Gaines said conversationally. Heard the shots, counted them. You're good, I'll give you that. Patient, disciplined, military? Caleb didn't move, didn't answer. Strong, silent type, fair enough. Gaines took a step forward. Here's the thing, friend. You killed 5 of my men. Now, I can respect the skill that took. I truly can, but business is business, and I can't let that slide. Sets a bad precedent. The big one had disappeared into the brush. Caleb had lost sight of him. Bad. Very bad. So here's what happens next, Gaines continued. You can come out, and we settle this quick. Or you can hide, and my associate finds you, and we settle it slow. Your choice. Caleb ran the calculations. If he fired now, Gaines would move. Man like that had good instincts. Maybe 50-50 chance of a kill shot. Then the big one would be on him, and fighting in close quarters with a rifle was suicide. Option 2, retreat. Fade back into the basin, hit them later when the odds were better. Option 3, a branch snapped behind him. Caleb rolled left as the big one's boot came down where his head had been. He came up swinging the rifle like a club, caught the giant in the ribs. Might as well have hit a tree. A massive hand clamped onto the rifle barrel, ripped it away, and threw it 10 feet. Caleb drew his revolver. The big one was faster than he looked. Slapped the gun aside before Caleb could fire. The revolver went spinning into the dirt. Then a fist like a sledgehammer caught Caleb in the chest, and the world went sideways. He hit the ground hard, ribs screaming, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Boots crunched toward him. Through blurred vision, he saw Gaines approaching, casual, like this was a Sunday stroll. Tough old bird, Gaines observed. I like that. But you're done, friend. Caleb's hand found a rock. Not much of a weapon. Better than nothing. Stand him up, Cole. The big one, Cole, grabbed Caleb by the collar and hauled him upright like he weighed nothing. Caleb's vision swam. The rock felt small and useless in his palm. Gaines stepped close, studied Caleb's face. You know what's funny? Gaines said quietly. I've seen that look before. That thing in your eyes. You're not some trapper who got lucky. He tilted his head. Who were you? Before? Caleb met his gaze, said nothing. Doesn't matter, I suppose. Gaines pulled a knife, long, thin, nasty. I'm going to make this last, for my boys. You understand? Caleb's fingers tightened on the rock, and then a gunshot. Cole's grip went slack. He staggered backward, a red hole in his chest, confusion on his face. He hit the ground like a felled oak. Gaines spun, drawing his pistol in the same motion, but froze. Standing at the edge of the clearing, rifle leveled, was Dutch Mercer. Drop it, Gaines, the old man said. His hands were shaking, but his aim was steady enough. Dutch, Gaines said slowly, the hell are you doing? Can't let you kill him. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, but I'm making it mine. Dutch's voice cracked slightly. Drop the knife. Step back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Gaines smiled, that same cold smile, and dropped the knife. Raised his hands. All right, old-timer, you got me. Dutch gestured with the rifle. Walk. Toward the horses. Slow. Gaines started walking. Calm. Controlled. And then, fast as a snake, he spun and drew. Dutch fired, hit him in the shoulder. Gaines got a shot off anyway. Caleb saw Dutch stumble, saw red bloom across his shirt, and something in him snapped. He didn't remember moving, didn't remember picking up the revolver from the dirt. But suddenly he was there between Gaines and Dutch, and the gun was in his hand, and it was roaring. 1 shot, 2, 3. Gaines went down hard, tried to rise. Couldn't. Blood poured from his chest. He looked up at Caleb with something like surprise. Who? He whispered. Who are... Caleb knelt beside him, looked him in the eyes. Nobody, he said quietly. Just a man who wanted to be left alone. Gaines's eyes went empty. Caleb turned to Dutch, who was sitting against a tree, hand pressed to his side. The wound was bad. Too much blood. Too fast. Jesus, Dutch, Caleb said, kneeling beside him. Why'd you come? Couldn't let them... Dutch coughed. You're not a bad man, Varn. Just tired one. I'm getting you to town. No. Dutch's hand found Caleb's arm. No time. Listen, there's things you should know. Save your strength. Always wondered about you. Dutch's breathing was shallow now. What you were running from. Nothing worth talking about. Everyone's running from something. Dutch smiled faintly. Difference is, some of us... Stop. His hand went slack. Caleb sat there beside him as the light faded from the old man's eyes and felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He buried Dutch that evening, near the creek where the cottonwoods grew thick. No words, no ceremony, just a man putting another man in the ground, the way it had always been done out here. When it was finished, Caleb stood over the grave and spoke anyway. I'm sorry, he said to the darkening sky. For what it's worth. The wind answered with silence. He walked back to his cabin under stars so bright they hurt to look at. The door still hung crooked. The supplies were still scattered. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Caleb stepped inside, lit a lamp, and sat at the overturned table. His hands were shaking, adrenaline, exhaustion, or something deeper. He couldn't tell anymore. 7 men had come to Red Basin looking for easy prey. 7 men were dead. And one old shopkeeper who'd tried to do the right thing. Caleb looked at his hands, scarred, weathered, stained with blood that wouldn't wash off no matter how hard he scrubbed. These hands had built this cabin, laid trap lines, skinned animals, lived a quiet life. These same hands had killed 8 men today. 9, if he was honest. He'd killed the man he'd been trying to become. The realization sat heavy in his chest. You couldn't bury the past. You could only decide what you did with it when it climbed back out of the ground. He thought about Dutch's last words. Some of us stop running. Maybe that was the trick. Maybe survival wasn't about hiding, wasn't about building walls or pushing people away. Maybe it was about deciding what you stood for when everything else got stripped away. Caleb stood, walked to the door, looked out at Red Basin stretching dark and endless under the stars. Somewhere out there, people needed to know what had happened. Dutch's family, if he had any. The folks in town who'd wonder why their shopkeeper never came home. They deserve better than silence. He'd leave in the morning, ride to town, tell them what happened, face whatever came next. But tonight, he'd sit here in this broken cabin and let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. The good and the bad. The necessary and the brutal. All of it. Because that's what being human meant. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Dutch had been trying to tell him all along. The wind picked up outside, moving through the canyon with its ancient, endless voice. Caleb listened to it, and for the first time in 11 years, he didn't feel alone. The ride into town took 4 hours under a sky the color of old bruises. Caleb kept Dutch's body wrapped in canvas and tied across the saddle of the dead man's horse, leading it behind his own. The wind had picked up during the night, carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet, but would soon. His ribs ached where Cole's fist had connected, and every breath felt like someone was driving nails into his chest. He didn't stop to rest. The town, such as it was, sat in a shallow valley where 3 creeks converged before drying up completely a mile downstream. Mercer's trading post dominated the north end, a squat building with a false front that made it look more important than it was. The saloon occupied the south end, and between them sat a scattering of structures that served various purposes depending on who needed what. Maybe 30 people lived here full-time. Another 20 drifted in and out with the seasons. Caleb had never bothered learning most of their names. He rode in just after noon. A few people were out. A woman hanging laundry, 2 men repairing a wagon wheel, a kid chasing a dog that didn't want to be caught. They all stopped when they saw him, when they saw the second horse, when they saw what was wrapped in canvas. The woman dropped her laundry basket. Caleb rode straight to the saloon and dismounted. His legs nearly gave out when his boots hit the ground. 4 hours in the saddle after yesterday had turned his muscles to rope. He tied both horses to the rail and stood there a moment, steadying himself. That Dutch Mercer's horse. The voice came from the saloon doorway. Caleb turned. A man stood there, mid-40s, wearing a vest that had seen better days and a badge that looked like it had been cut from a tin can. Town Marshal. Caleb had seen him before, never spoken to him. It is, Caleb said. And that's Dutch? Yeah. The marshal stepped down from the porch, moved to the wrapped body. He pulled back the canvas enough to see Dutch's face, then covered it again. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to spit out. What happened? He got shot trying to save my life. The marshal looked at Caleb for a long time. Other people were gathering now, coming out of buildings, crossing the street, forming a loose semicircle around the horses. Caleb could feel their eyes on him, weighing, judging, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Maybe you better come inside, the marshal said. Explain yourself proper. Caleb nodded, started to follow, then stopped. There's 6 more bodies up in Devil's Cut, he said, and one at the gang's camp south of there. You'll need wagons. The silence that followed was the kind that pressed against your ears. 7 bodies, the marshal repeated slowly. 7, including Dutch, makes 8. I can count. The marshal's hand drifted toward his sidearm, not threatening, just unconscious positioning. Caleb saw it and didn't react. Just stood there, exhausted and hurting and waiting for whatever came next. You kill all of them? Someone in the crowd asked. Most? Most? Caleb turned to face the voice. It belonged to a young man, maybe 20, wearing an apron that marked him as working at the general store. His face was pale, uncertain. Dutch killed one, Caleb said. The big fellow. Shot him to keep him from breaking my neck. Why? The woman who dropped her laundry pushed through the crowd. Her eyes were red, angry. Why would Dutch do that? He didn't even know you. I don't know, Caleb said honestly. But he did it anyway. That doesn't make sense. No, Caleb agreed. It doesn't. The marshal cleared his throat. Everyone back up. Give us room. He gestured to Caleb. Inside. Now. The saloon was dim after the bright cold outside. It smelled like old tobacco and spilled beer and unwashed bodies. Familiar smells. Human smells. 3 men sat at a corner table playing cards. They looked up when Caleb and the marshal entered, sized up the situation, and quietly left through the back door. The marshal pointed to a chair. Caleb sat. His ribs screamed. Talk, the marshal said. So Caleb talked. He told it straight. No embellishment, no justification. The gang riding into the basin, the signs he'd noticed, the raid on his cabin, the ambush at Devil's Cut, Dutch showing up at the end, the fight, all of it. The marshal listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. You know what you're telling me, the marshal said. You're confessing to killing 7 men. 6. Dutch killed 1. 6 then. You're confessing to killing 6 men. I'm telling you what happened. That's not the same thing as self-defense. They came to my home, destroyed my property, threatened my life. Caleb met the marshal's eyes. What would you have done? Not killed 6 people. Then you'd be dead. The marshal stood, walked to the bar, poured himself a drink. He didn't offer one to Caleb, just stood there, swirling the whiskey in his glass, thinking. Dutch have family? Caleb asked. Sister in Missouri. Haven't seen her in 15 years. The marshal drank, grimaced. He was a good man. Didn't deserve to die in some basin shootout. No, Caleb said. He didn't. But he did. Because of you. The words landed like a fist. Caleb didn't argue. Couldn't argue. It was true. I'll write to his sister, the marshal said. Tell her what happened. She'll want to know. I'll pay for the burial, whatever it costs. With what? Pelts? The marshal laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dutch died because he felt sorry for you. Now you want to pay for his funeral with beaver skins. That's rich. Caleb stood. The movement sent fresh pain through his chest, but he stayed upright. I don't have money. I have pelts. It's what I've got. Sit down. I'm done sitting. The marshal's hand moved to his gun again. This time it was a threat. I said sit down. Caleb looked at the gun, looked at the marshal, sat. Here's how this works, the marshal said. You stay in town until I figure out what to do with you. We're going to ride out to Devil's Cut, verify your story, collect those bodies. If everything matches what you told me, and I mean everything, then maybe we call this self-defense and you walk away. If it doesn't, he let the sentence hang. And if I don't want to stay, then I shoot you for resisting arrest. You arresting me? Not yet. Call it protective custody. For your own safety. My safety. People love Dutch. When they find out what happened, they're going to want someone to blame. The marshal holstered his gun. Right now, you're the only target available. Caleb understood. Small-town justice wasn't about law. It was about balance. Someone died, someone had to pay. Didn't matter if it was fair. There's a room above the saloon, the marshal continued. You'll stay there. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone. I'll post someone outside the door. Like a prisoner. Like a man who might not survive the night otherwise. It wasn't a bluff. Caleb could hear voices outside, raised, angry, building towards something. The crowd was growing. All right, he said. The marshal looked surprised. Just like that? I'm tired. Got nowhere else to be. Caleb stood again, slower this time. But I want my rifle and my revolver. Not a chance. Then I'll take my chances with the crowd. They stared at each other. Outside, someone was shouting Dutch's name. Glass broke. Bottle, probably. The sound of grief turning to rage. The marshal swore under his breath. Fine. But you shoot anyone, I'll hang you myself. Fair enough. The room above the saloon was 8 feet by 10 feet with a cot, a chair, and a window that overlooked the street. The marshal left Caleb's weapons on the chair, locked the door from the outside, and posted a man named Carson, one of the card players from earlier, at the bottom of the stairs. Caleb sat on the cot and listened to the town lose its mind. The shouting lasted until dark. He caught pieces through the window, accusations, demands for justice, suggestions that ranged from hanging to burning. A few voices tried to argue for calm, but they were drowned out. Grief was a fire that fed on itself, and Dutch's death was the spark. Someone threw a rock through the saloon window around sunset. It didn't reach Caleb's room, but the sound of shattering glass sent a ripple through the crowd. For a moment he thought they might rush the building. Then the marshal fired a shot into the air. Next person who throws something gets a night in a cell. His voice carried over the mob. Dutch wouldn't want this. You know he wouldn't. Dutch is dead, someone shouted back. Because he chose to help someone. That was his choice. You gonna dishonor his memory by becoming the thing he died fighting against? The silence that followed was fragile, but it held. Go home, the marshal said, quieter now. All of you. We'll sort this out proper, I promise. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, like water draining from a cracked basin. Caleb watched them go and felt something hollow settle in his chest. These people didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, and he'd brought death to their town, to a man they'd cared about. He lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling until sleep took him. The dreams came hard and fast, fragmented images of men falling, blood on stone, Dutch's eyes going empty. He woke twice, gasping, hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The second time he gave up on sleep and sat by the window, watching the empty street. Somewhere around 3 a.m, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb grabbed his revolver, moved away from the window. The footsteps stopped outside his door. A key scraped in the lock. The door opened. The marshal stood there holding a lamp. His face looked 10 years older than it had that afternoon. Get dressed, he said. We're leaving. Where? Devil's Cut. I want to see these bodies before sunrise. Caleb pulled on his boots. Why before sunrise? Because if this town wakes up and I'm still here, they're going to demand I do something I don't want to do. The marshal handed him the rifle. Come on. 4 men waited outside. Carson, the young fellow from the general store, and 2 others Caleb didn't recognize. They all carried rifles and expressions that said they'd rather be anywhere else. This is volunteer work, the marshal explained as they walked to the stables. Nobody's getting paid. Nobody has to come. But I need witnesses for what we find up there. You don't trust me, Caleb said. I don't know you. That's not the same thing. They rode out under stars that were starting to fade at the edges. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were hooves on frozen ground and the wind that never really stopped. Caleb led them north toward the basin, retracing the route he'd taken just yesterday, though it felt like years. The bodies at Devil's Cut hadn't moved. Why would they? Dead men stayed where they fell unless someone came to collect them. The marshal dismounted, walked among the corpses, examining each one. His volunteers hung back, faces pale in the lamplight. The young one from the general store threw up behind a rock. 5 here, the marshal said. You said 6 at the canyon, 1 at the camp. That's right. Show me the camp. They found Gaines and Cole where Caleb had left them. Gaines had stiffened in the cold, his face locked in that final expression of surprise. Cole lay on his back, the hole in his chest black and final. The marshal knelt beside Gaines, went through his pockets. He pulled out a folded paper, opened it, read by lamplight. "Wanted poster," he said. "Harrison Gaines, robbery, assault, murder in 3 territories. $500 reward." He looked up at Caleb. "You know who this was?" "Not until now." The marshal moved to Cole, checked him too, found another poster. "Marcus Cole. Same charges, different territories. Another 300. He stood, brushed dirt from his knees. These men were professional criminals. They've got a dozen deaths between them. "Does that change anything?" Caleb asked. "Changes everything." The marshal folded the posters carefully. "You didn't kill random drifters. You killed wanted men. That's not murder. That's public service." One of the volunteers laughed, sharp, nervous. "We rode all the way out here at 3 a.m. to find out this fellow's a hero?" "Nobody's a hero," the marshal said. "Heroes don't leave 7 bodies scattered across a canyon. But this isn't murder either." He looked at Caleb. "You were protecting yourself from known criminals. That's self-defense under any law I know." "What about Dutch?" Caleb asked quietly. The marshal was quiet a long time. "Dutch made a choice. He rode out here knowing the risk. That's on him, not you." "Doesn't feel that way." "Feelings don't change facts." The marshal walked back to his horse. "We'll collect these bodies, bring them back to town. You'll help." It took until mid-morning to load all 8 corpses onto makeshift travois and haul them back. Grim work made worse by the cold that had already started the process of preservation. Caleb worked alongside the volunteers, lifting, securing, trying not to think about the fact that he'd killed most of these men less than 24 hours ago. Carson worked beside him at one point, tying rope around a body. "You were in a war?" he asked. "Something like that." "Thought so. I seen that look before. My uncle had it. Came back from the rebellion all wrong inside." Carson pulled the knot tight. "He never talked about it, neither." "Nothing to talk about." "Yeah." Carson moved to the next body. "That's what he said too." They reached town around noon. Word had spread. The whole population was waiting. The crowd parted as they rode through, silent now, staring at the bodies. Someone counted them out loud as they passed. 5, 6, 7. When they reached Dutch's wrapped form, several people removed their hats. A woman started crying. The sound was soft, private, but it carried in the stillness. The marshal raised his hand. "Listen up. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're feeling. But these men," he gestured to the bodies, were wanted criminals. Harrison Gaines, Marcus Cole. The others we'll identify when we can. They came here looking for easy targets. They found Caleb Varn instead. "Dutch still died," someone said. "Yes, he did, because he chose to help someone who needed it." The marshal's voice hardened. "Dutch Mercer lived his whole life helping people. He died the same way. You want to honor his memory? Then you honor that choice. You don't turn it into an excuse for revenge." The silence that followed was different from yesterday's. Less angry, more confused. People looking at each other, trying to figure out what they were supposed to feel. A woman stepped forward, older, gray-haired, wearing an apron dusted with flour. "He deserves a proper burial. Dutch does. Not these others, but Dutch." "Agreed," the marshal said. "We'll see to it." "I'll pay," Caleb said. Every head turned toward him. "Whatever it costs, I'll cover it." "With what?" the woman asked. "You're a trapper. You got pelts and not much else." "Then I'll trap more. Work it off, however long it takes." She studied him, really looked at him the way people do when they're trying to see past the surface. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but you work for me until the debt's paid. I run the bakery. I need help with deliveries, chopping wood, repairs. You'll do that." "Yes, ma'am." "And you'll attend the service. Stand up when people talk about who Dutch was. You owe him that much." Caleb swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." The woman turned back to the crowd. "Anyone else got demands? Might as well get them out now." Nobody spoke. "Then we're done here?" She walked away, and slowly the rest of the crowd dispersed. The marshal waited until they were mostly alone before he spoke. You just agreed to work off a debt that'll take months to clear. I know. Could have just left. Rode out tonight. Nobody would have stopped you. I know that too. The marshal studied him. You're either stupid or decent. Can't figure which. Maybe both. Yeah. The marshal almost smiled. Maybe both. They buried Dutch 2 days later in the cemetery that overlooked the valley. Nearly everyone in town attended. The service was simple. No preacher, just people standing around a hole in the ground, sharing stories about a man who'd lived quietly and died loud. Caleb stood at the back, away from the main group. He didn't belong here, among people who'd known Dutch as more than just the shopkeeper who didn't ask questions. But he'd promised the woman, her name was Martha, he'd learned. So he stood and listened. Always gave credit when folks were short. Fixed my wagon wheel that time, wouldn't take payment. Made sure the widow Peterson had firewood every winter. Small kindnesses. Small moments. The kind of life that didn't make headlines, but mattered anyway. When it came time to lower the coffin, the marshal looked at Caleb. You want to say anything? Every eye turned toward him. Caleb felt his throat close up. Words were hard at the best of times. Right now, they were impossible. But he'd promised. I didn't know him, Caleb said. His voice came out rough, unpracticed. Traded with him for years, but I didn't know him. Didn't ask about his life, didn't care to. He paused. That was my failing, not his. Someone shifted uncomfortably. He saved my life, Caleb continued. Didn't have to. Probably shouldn't have. But he rode out there anyway, and when it mattered, he didn't hesitate. He looked at the coffin. I can't pay that back. Can't make it right. But I can try to... He searched for the words. To be the kind of person who deserved saving. I'll try. He stepped back. Nobody spoke. Then Martha nodded once. A small gesture, but it felt like permission. They filled in the grave after that. Caleb took a turn with the shovel, same as everyone else, and when it was done, he was the last to leave. The work started the next morning. Martha ran her bakery with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. She had systems, schedules, expectations. Caleb showed up at 4:30, before dawn, and found her already elbow-deep in dough. You're late, she said. You said 5. I said be ready to work at 5. Being ready means being here before. She pointed to a corner. Woodpile needs splitting. Oven needs stoking. When that's done, there's deliveries. Caleb worked. Split wood until his shoulders burned, kept the oven fed, loaded bread into crates and carried them to houses scattered across town and beyond. Martha had customers everywhere, ranches, way stations, a mining camp 15 miles west. She fed half the territory, and now Caleb was part of that operation. It was harder than trapping, more constant. Trapping let you work at your own pace, take breaks when you needed them. This was relentless. Martha didn't stop, so he didn't stop. By the end of the first week, his hands were raw and his back felt like it might break. By the end of the second, his body had adapted or given up arguing. Hard to tell which. People watched him. He felt their eyes tracking him as he made deliveries, split wood in the public square, repaired Martha's storage shed. They didn't talk to him much, but they watched, weighing, judging. Carson was the first to break the silence. Caleb was delivering bread to the saloon when the man appeared, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Figured you could use this, Carson said, offering one. Caleb took it. The coffee was terrible, burnt and bitter. He drank it anyway. People are talking, Carson said. I noticed. Not all bad. Some folks think you did the right thing. Others aren't sure yet. He sipped his coffee. But you're still here. That counts for something. I gave my word. Most men's word doesn't mean much. Yours seems to. Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. Just finished his coffee and went back to work. But something shifted after that conversation. Not dramatically. Nobody threw him a parade. But the watching changed, less hostile, more curious, like the town was slowly deciding he might be human after all. Martha noticed. You're doing all right, she said one morning while he was loading the wagon. Just working off my debt. It's more than that. She handed him a list. These deliveries go to the Peterson ranch. Widow I mentioned at the service. She's going to want to talk. About what? About Dutch, about you, About whatever she feels like. Martha fixed him with a look. You'll listen. Understand? Yes, ma'am. The Peterson Ranch was a 2-hour ride northwest. The house was small but well-maintained, and the widow who answered the door looked about 70, with eyes that could cut glass. You're Varn, she said. Yes, ma'am. The one Dutch died for. Yes, ma'am. She looked him over like she was pricing livestock. Come in, I'll make tea. The inside of the house was neat, spare, filled with the kind of quiet that comes from living alone too long. Widow Peterson made tea with precise movements, handed Caleb a cup, and sat across from him. Dutch talked about you once, she said. Caleb blinked. He did? Last winter. I asked him about the trappers up in the basin. He mentioned a fellow named Varn who kept to himself. She sipped her tea. Said you reminded him of someone. Who? Himself. 20 years ago, before he settled here. She set down her cup. Dutch wasn't always a shopkeeper. He was a soldier, fought in places that don't exist on maps anymore, did things he never talked about. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. I didn't know. Nobody did. That was the point. Widow Peterson leaned forward. He saw something in you, recognized it, maybe. That's why he rode out there. Not pity, recognition. Doesn't change the fact he's dead. No, it doesn't. Her voice softened. But it means he died making a choice he understood. Soldier's choice. You stand or you run. He stood. Caleb stared into his tea. I would have preferred he ran. Of course you would. You're alive. She stood, moved to a shelf, took down a small wooden box. He left instructions. In case something happened, this is for whoever he died helping. She handed him the box. Inside was a letter and a small leather pouch. Caleb opened the letter first. The handwriting was messy but clear. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably did something stupid, probably worth it. The money in the pouch is for my sister. See that she gets it. The rest is for you. Stop running. Whatever you're hiding from, it's already caught you. Difference is whether you face it standing or kneeling. I chose standing. You should too. Dutch. Caleb read it twice, folded it carefully, put it back in the box. He knew, Caleb said quietly. Knew what? That I was running. From myself, mostly. He looked at Widow Peterson. How'd he know? Takes one to know one. She took the box back. I'll mail this to his sister. You keep the letter if you want. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't waste what he gave you. Caleb rode back to town as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Dutch's letter folded in his pocket. The words kept circling in his head. Stop running. Face it standing or kneeling. He'd spent 11 years trying to outrun a past he couldn't change. 11 years building walls, keeping distance, pretending that isolation was the same as peace. Dutch had seen through it in one conversation. The realization hurt worse than Cole's fist, worse than the bullet wounds he'd taken over the years, worse than anything physical. Because it meant he'd wasted time, wasted years, wasted opportunities to be something other than a ghost. When he got back to town, Martha was closing up the bakery. She looked up as he approached. Widow Peterson talk your ear off? Something like that. She's good at that. Martha locked the door. You all right? I don't know yet. She studied him. Fair answer. Come by tomorrow, same time. We've got a big order for the mining camp. Yes, ma'am. He started to leave, then stopped. Martha? Yeah? Thank you. For the work. For not... He struggled to find the words. For treating me like I might be worth saving. Martha's expression softened. Dutch thought you were. That's good enough for me. She paused. But you gotta do the rest yourself. Understand? I'm starting to. That night, Caleb sat in his rented room. He'd moved out of the saloon into a boarding house run by a quiet couple who didn't ask questions, and reread Dutch's letter. Stop running. The words felt like a challenge, like permission, like both at once. He'd killed men before coming to Red Basin, done things he couldn't take back, served causes he no longer believed in, followed orders that still woke him up sweating in the dark. That's what he'd been running from, not the law, but the weight of his own history. But running hadn't lightened the load. It had just meant carrying it alone. Dutch had understood that, had lived it. And in the end, he'd chosen to stand for something instead of hiding from everything. Caleb folded the letter and put it in his pack, next to the few possessions he owned. Then he lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd work. Split wood, stoke ovens, make deliveries. Do honest labor for honest people. It wouldn't erase the past. Wouldn't bring Dutch back. Wouldn't make him a good man. But it was a start. And starting, he was beginning to learn, was harder and more important than anything that came after. Outside, the wind moved through town, rattling windows and carrying the smell of snow. Winter was coming. The hard months. But Caleb found he wasn't dreading them the way he used to, because for the first time in 11 years, he wasn't facing them alone. The snow came 3 weeks later, heavy and mean, turning the world white and silent. Caleb woke to find 6 inches on the ground and more falling. He dressed in the dark, pulled on his coat, and headed to Martha's bakery through drifts that came up to his shins. She was already there, of course. The woman never seemed to sleep. "Roads'll be bad today," she said, not looking up from the dough she was kneading. "Mining camp order's gonna have to wait." "I can make it." "I said it can wait." Caleb grabbed the wood axe from its hook. "And I said I can make it." Martha stopped kneading, looked at him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You trying to prove something?" "Just doing my job." "Your job is what I tell you it is. And I'm telling you the camp can wait a day." They stared at each other across the flour-dusted table. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Finally, Martha shook her head. "Stubborn as a damn mule," she muttered. "Fine, but you take Carson with you. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1 in this weather. I don't care what you need. You're taking Carson or you're not going. Choose." Caleb chose. They left an hour later, the wagon loaded with bread wrapped in canvas to keep it from freezing solid. Carson drove while Caleb rode alongside on his horse, rifle across his saddle. The world had gone eerily quiet under the snow. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of hooves and wheels breaking through the crust. "You always this pleasant in the morning?" Carson asked after the first mile of silence. "Usually worse." "That's comforting." Carson adjusted his scarf against the cold. "Martha says you're doing good work. High praise from her." "She say that?" "Not in those words, but she hasn't fired you yet, and she's fired 3 people since I've known her." Carson grinned. "You're practically family." Caleb didn't know what to do with that, so he said nothing. They made the mining camp by noon. The place was a collection of rough structures clinging to the side of a mountain, connected by paths that turned to mud in summer and ice in winter. Maybe 40 men worked there, pulling copper from tunnels that went deeper every month. The foreman, a thick-shouldered man named Garrett, met them at the entrance. "Didn't think you'd make it in this weather." "Neither did Martha," Carson said, but Varn here was insistent. Garrett looked at Caleb. "You're the one killed those outlaws." "Word travels," Caleb said. "This far out, we don't get much news. When we do, it sticks." Garrett gestured toward a shed. "Bring the wagon in there. Boys'll be glad for fresh bread. Been eating hardtack for 2 weeks." They unloaded while miners gathered, stamping their feet against the cold, breath steaming in the frigid air. Young men mostly, though a few grizzled veterans stood among them. They took the bread like it was gold, passing loaves hand to hand, already tearing into them. "You really kill 7 men?" one of them asked Caleb. 6. "Close enough," the miner grinned. "Buy you a drink when this shift's done?" "I don't drink." "Everyone drinks up here. Not much else to do." "Then I guess I'm boring." The miners laughed at that. Genuine laughter, not mocking. One of them clapped Caleb on the shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him over. "Boring's good," the man said. "Boring means you don't cause problems. We like boring." They finished unloading, and Garrett paid in cash, actual money, not credit or promises. Martha had told Caleb to collect payment on the spot. "Mining camps go bust overnight," she'd said. "Cash only." Carson counted the bills twice before tucking them inside his coat. "We should head back before the weather gets worse." "It's going to get worse," Garrett said. "Storm's just starting. You'd be smarter to wait it out here." Caleb looked at the sky. Heavy gray clouds pressed down like a lid. The air had that electric feel that came before serious snow. Garrett was right. Riding into this was stupid. But staying meant being trapped with 40 miners who wanted to ask questions about things Caleb didn't want to discuss. "We'll risk it," he said. Carson shot him a look but didn't argue. They climbed back onto the wagon and started the return journey. The storm hit an hour later. It came fast, the way mountain storms do. One moment you could see 50 yards, the next you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Snow fell so thick it felt solid. The wind picked up, driving ice into their faces like needles. Carson pulled the wagon to a stop. "Can't see the road." Caleb dismounted, moved to the front of the wagon. The world was white in every direction. No landmarks, no path, nothing. He knew these hills, but in a whiteout, knowledge didn't help much. One wrong turn and they'd go over an embankment or into a ravine. "There's a line shack about 2 miles east," Caleb shouted over the wind. "We can wait it out there." "You sure?" "No, but it's better than freezing here." They moved slow, Caleb leading his horse while feeling for the ground with each step. Carson followed in the wagon, close enough that Caleb could hear the wheels but far enough to avoid getting run over if something went wrong. The 2 miles took 3 hours. By the time Caleb spotted the shack, a dark shape emerging from the white like a ghost, his hands were numb and his face felt like it had been carved from ice. They got the wagon and horse under a lean-to that served as a stable, then stumbled into the shack. It was one room, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace and a pile of wood that someone had left for emergencies exactly like this. Caleb got a fire going while Carson rubbed feeling back into his fingers. "That was close," Carson said when he could talk again. His lips were blue. "Yeah, if you hadn't known about this place." "But I did." Carson looked at him. "You don't take compliments well, do you?" "Don't get many." "Maybe you should start accepting the ones you do get." The fire caught properly, throwing heat and light into the small space. They sat close to it, letting warmth seep back into their bones. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and angry. "We're going to be here a while," Carson said. "Probably till morning." "Good thing there's wood." Carson pulled out a flask from inside his coat. "And this?" "I said I don't drink." "You said that to the miners." "I'm not a miner." Carson took a sip, offered the flask. "It's medicinal, keeps you warm." Caleb hesitated, then took it. The whiskey burned going down, cheap stuff, but effective. He handed it back. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Then Carson spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "You're gonna anyway." "Fair point." Carson took another sip. "What were you doing out in the basin, before all this?" "Trapping." "I know that. I mean, why? Man with your skills could work anywhere, make real money. But you chose to live alone in the middle of nowhere." Caleb stared into the fire. "You ever do something you can't undo?" "Everyone has. I mean something big. Something that changes who you are." Carson was quiet. "Yeah, once." "What'd you do after?" "Tried to forget. Didn't work." Carson set the flask down between them. "So I came out here. Started over." "How's that working?" "Better some days than others." He looked at Caleb. "You?" "Same." They didn't talk much after that, just sat by the fire while the storm tried to tear the world apart outside. Somewhere around midnight, Carson fell asleep sitting up, head tilted back against the wall. Caleb stayed awake, watching the flames, thinking about what Dutch had written. Stop running. He'd been doing that these past weeks, working for Martha, making deliveries, interacting with people instead of avoiding them. It felt unnatural, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But maybe that was the point. Maybe growing meant being uncomfortable. The storm broke sometime before dawn. Caleb woke Carson and they headed out into a world transformed. Everything was white and still, the snow piled so deep the wagon could barely move through it. They made it back to town by mid-morning, exhausted and half frozen. Martha was waiting at the bakery, arms crossed. "I told you to wait." "You also told me to collect payment," Caleb said. He handed her the cash. She counted it, looked at him, and almost smiled. "You're an idiot." "Yes, ma'am." "But you got the money." "So you're a useful idiot." She pocketed the cash. "Take the day off, both of you." Carson looked like he might cry with relief. "Bless you, Martha." "I'm not blessed. I'm practical. Can't have you dying of exhaustion." She turned to Caleb. "You need anything?" Sleep. Good answer. But sleep didn't come easy. Caleb lay in his boarding house room, staring at the ceiling, and found his mind circling back to the shootout at Devil's Cut. He'd killed men before. That wasn't new. But something about this felt different. Final, maybe. Like a door closing on one part of his life while another opened. The problem was he didn't know what waited on the other side. Days turned to weeks. The snow kept falling, burying the town under layers of white that turned everything quiet and clean. Caleb fell into a rhythm. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Simple, sustainable. But the town was changing around him in small ways he didn't quite understand at first. People started nodding when he passed. Not friendly exactly, but acknowledging. Like he'd become part of the landscape instead of a strange growth on it. The young miner from the camp, his name was Thomas, showed up in town one day and tracked Caleb down at Martha's bakery. "Wanted to thank you proper," Thomas said, "for delivering in that storm. Meant a lot to the boys. Just doing my job." "Maybe, but most folks wouldn't have." Thomas handed him a small cloth bag. "From the crew, as thanks." Inside were $3 silver. Caleb tried to hand them back. "I already got paid. That was for Martha." "This is for you." Thomas grinned. "Buy yourself something nice." "I don't need—" "Take the damn money, Varn. You earned it." Caleb took it. Thomas left. And Caleb stood there holding $3 like they might explode. Martha came out of the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. "What's that?" "Gift. From the miners." "You gonna take it?" "Already did." "Good. They don't give gifts lightly up there." She studied him. "You're starting to fit, you know." "Fit what?" "Here. This town. People are getting used to you." Caleb didn't know how to feel about that. Part of him wanted to argue, to say he wasn't trying to fit anywhere, but that would have been a lie, and he'd spent enough years lying to himself. "Is that a problem?" he asked. "Depends. You planning to run again when the debt's paid?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The debt to Martha, to the town, to Dutch's memory, it had become the frame around which he built his days. What happened when that frame disappeared? "I don't know," he said, honestly. Martha nodded like that was the answer she'd expected. "Well, you've got time to figure it out." But time moved faster than he thought. By late February, the debt was nearly cleared. Martha kept meticulous records in a ledger she showed him once a week. Every delivery, every cord of wood split, every repair made, all of it tracked and measured against what a proper burial and headstone cost. "2 more weeks," she said one morning, "then we're square." "That fast?" "You work hard, harder than most." She closed the ledger. "Question is, what are you going to do after?" "Haven't decided." "Better decide soon. People are asking." "What people?" Martha gave him a look. "The marshal wants to know if you're staying. Says the town could use someone with your skills, whatever those are." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "He say that?" "Last week. I told him you hadn't said anything about leaving, but you hadn't said anything about staying either." She paused. "So, which is it?" "I told you. I don't know." "That's not an answer, Varn. That's a dodge." She was right, and they both knew it. Caleb had gotten good at dodges over the years. Ways of not committing, not deciding, not putting himself in a position where he had to be responsible for anything beyond his own survival. But that kind of life had led him to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, alone and half dead inside. Dutch had seen it. Martha saw it. Hell, even Carson probably saw it. The only one still pretending was Caleb himself. "I'll think about it," he said. "You do that." The conversation stuck with him through the rest of the day, nagging like a splinter. He made deliveries, split wood, helped a family repair a collapsed shed roof. Normal work, good work, the kind that left you tired but satisfied. And somewhere in the middle of it, he realized he didn't hate it. That was new. For 11 years, he'd measured his days by absence. No people, no complications, no responsibilities beyond what he chose. Safety through isolation. But it had also been emptiness through isolation, and he hadn't let himself see the difference. Here, people knew his name, asked him questions, expected him to show up and do what he said he'd do. It was uncomfortable and demanding and sometimes frustrating. It was also real in a way nothing else had been for a long time. He He was still thinking about it 2 days later when trouble arrived. It came in the form of 3 riders who showed up at noon asking questions at the saloon. Caleb was making a delivery to the general store when Carson found him. "There's men looking for you," Carson said quietly. "What kind of men?" "The careful kind. Well armed. Asking about what happened at Devil's Cut." Caleb felt old instincts kick in, assess the threat, plan escape routes, prepare for violence. But he pushed them down. "They say what they want?" "Just that they need to talk to the man who killed Harrison Gaines." "Where are they now?" "Saloon. Marshals with them." Caleb finished unloading the delivery, then walked across the street to the saloon. Carson followed without being asked. The 3 men sat at a corner table with the marshal. They looked professional, clean weapons, quality gear, the kind of bearing that came from training. Not outlaws. Something else. The marshal saw Caleb enter and waved him over. "These gentlemen want to talk to you." The oldest of the 3, maybe 40, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, stood and extended a hand. "Mr. Varn, name's Mitchell. I work for the Territorial Marshal's office in Denver." Caleb shook his hand. "That's supposed to mean something to me?" "Only if you're interested in the bounties on the men you killed." That stopped Caleb cold. Bounties. Mitchell pulled out a folder, spread papers on the table. Harrison Gaines, Marcus Cole, and the others. Total comes to $1,500, plus expenses for delivering justice that we've been trying to serve for 3 years. He looked at Caleb. "That money's yours if you want it. $1,500. More money than Caleb had seen in a decade. Enough to start over properly, buy land, build something real." "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch. You did the work. You get paid." Mitchell paused. "Though there is something we'd like to discuss." "Here it comes," Carson muttered. Mitchell smiled. "We're always looking for capable people. Men who can handle themselves in difficult situations. The territories are growing, and law enforcement can't keep up. We need deputies, bounty hunters, specialists." He gestured to the papers. "Your work at Devil's Cut was impressive, professional. We could use someone with those skills." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard the offer." "Don't need to. I'm done with that life." Mitchell studied him. "You sure the pay's good? Stable work, respected position?" "I'm sure." One of the other men, younger, eager-looking, leaned forward. "You could do a lot of good. Stop people like Gaines before they hurt anyone. Or I could stay here and split wood for a bakery." Caleb met Mitchell's eyes. "I'll take the bounty money. The rest you can keep." Mitchell was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "Fair enough. We'll process the paperwork. Money should arrive in a few weeks." "Good." Caleb started to leave, but Mitchell called after him. "Mr. Varn, if you change your mind, I won't." Outside, Carson caught up to him. $1,500. That's a fortune. It's money. It's more than money. It's a fresh start. You could go anywhere, do anything. Caleb stopped walking, looked at Carson. "What would you do if someone offered you that?" Carson thought about it. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me would want to leave, start over somewhere nobody knows my past." He paused. But another part would wonder if running to a new place would just mean being alone somewhere else. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "That's the question, isn't it?" They walked back to the bakery in silence. Martha was waiting, arms crossed in that way that meant she already knew everything. "Territorial marshals," she said. "Not a question. Word travels fast." "It's a small town. Everything travels fast." She studied him. "They offer you a job?" "Yeah." "You take it?" "No." Something shifted in Martha's expression. Relief, maybe, though she hid it quickly. "Good. I need someone to fix the roof before spring." Caleb almost smiled. "That wasn't in the original deal. Deal's almost done. This would be a new arrangement." She pulled out her ledger, made a notation. "Roof repair, general maintenance, continued deliveries. I'll pay you a fair wage. Not marshal money, but steady." "You offering me a permanent job?" "I'm offering you a choice. Take it or leave it." Caleb looked at the ledger, at Martha's careful handwriting tracking every debt and payment, at the life she'd built here through hard work and refusal to quit, at the opportunity to be part of something instead of apart from everything. "I'll need to think, No." Martha closed the ledger. You've thought enough. Time to decide. You staying or leaving? The question hung there, simple and enormous. Every eye in the bakery, Martha's, Carson's, a couple of customers who'd stopped to listen, waited for his answer. Caleb thought about his cabin up in Red Basin, empty and cold. About 11 years of isolation that had solved exactly nothing. About Dutch riding out to save a stranger because it was the right thing to do. About the weight of carrying the past alone versus the possibility of setting it down in front of people who might help shoulder it. I'm staying, he said. Martha nodded once. Good. Start tomorrow. 4:30. 4:30, Caleb agreed. He left the bakery feeling lighter than he had in years. The town square was busy with afternoon activity, people buying supplies, kids playing in the snow, a dog barking at nothing in particular. Normal life. The kind he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve or want. But maybe deserving didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was showing up anyway. He was heading back to the boarding house when he saw them, two more riders coming into town from the south. They moved different from Mitchell's group, slower, watching everything. One of them looked familiar. Caleb's hand moved toward his hip before he remembered he wasn't carrying. He'd left his gun in his room, another sign of how much things had changed. The rider stopped in front of the saloon, dismounted. The familiar one turned and Caleb got a clear look at his face. Recognition hit like a fist. Jacob Mercer, Dutch's nephew. Caleb had seen him once, years ago, when the young man had visited his uncle. He'd been maybe 16 then. Now he was in his 20s, hard-faced and dangerous looking, and he was staring straight at Caleb. You're Varn, Jacob said. Not a question. I am. My uncle died because of you. The street went quiet. People stopped what they were doing, sensing something about to happen. Carson appeared at the edge of Caleb's vision, hand near his gun. Your uncle died saving my life, Caleb said carefully. But yes, because of me. Jacob's jaw worked. I heard the story, how you killed those outlaws, how Dutch rode out to help you. He took a step forward. I heard how you're working for Martha now, making deliveries, playing at being normal. I'm not playing at anything. You got my uncle killed and now you're just living here like nothing happened? I buried him, worked off the debt, tried to honor his memory the best I know how. That's supposed to make it right? No, Caleb said quietly. Nothing makes it right. He's dead. That doesn't change. Jacob's hand moved toward his gun. The second rider, older, calmer, put a hand on Jacob's shoulder. Easy, the man said. This isn't why we came. The hell it isn't. Your mother sent us to collect his things. That's all. Jacob shook off the hand but didn't draw. He stared at Caleb with eyes full of pain and rage, and something else Caleb recognized because he'd felt it himself, the desperate need for someone to blame. My uncle was a good man, Jacob said, voice shaking. He didn't deserve to die in some canyon shootout. No, he didn't. You should have stayed out of it. Should have let you handle your own problems. You're right. That seemed to throw Jacob. He'd been building toward something, a fight, probably, and Caleb's agreement deflated it. Then why'd he do it? Because he saw someone who needed help and decided that mattered more than staying safe. Caleb paused. He made a choice. I didn't ask him to make it, but I'm trying to honor it. By working in a bakery, by staying, by not running, by being the kind of person who deserved what he did. Caleb met Jacob's eyes. Your uncle left me a letter, said I should stop running, face things standing up. That's what I'm trying to do. Jacob's hand fell away from his gun. The rage in his eyes didn't disappear, but something else crept in alongside it. Grief, maybe. Understanding. I want to see where he's buried, Jacob said. I'll take you. They walked to the cemetery in silence, the whole town watching. Jacob's companion stayed back, giving them space. When they reached Dutch's grave, Jacob stood there for a long time, staring at the headstone. It's a good marker, he said finally. Martha helped choose it. She was always fond of him. Jacob knelt, touched the stone. He talked about you once, in a letter to my mother. Said there was a trapper up in the basin who reminded him of himself. Your uncle told me the same thing, through Widow Peterson. He was always good at seeing people, better than they saw themselves. Jacob stood. He thought you could change, become something better. I'm trying. Are you? Or are you just hiding in a different place? The question cut deep because Caleb had asked himself the same thing 100 times. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'm here. I'm working. I'm not running. That has to count for something. Jacob looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, maybe it does. He turned to leave, then stopped. My uncle was tough, survived things that would have killed most men, but he had a soft spot for people trying to do better. Guess that got him killed in the end. Or maybe it's what made his life worth living. Jacob didn't respond to that, just walked away, shoulders tight, carrying grief the way soldiers carry rifles, like it's part of the load you don't put down. Caleb stood at the grave a while longer, alone with the wind and the stone and the weight of everything that had brought him here. I'm trying, he said to the marker. Don't know if it's enough, but I'm trying. The wind gave no answer. It never did. But somehow, standing there with dirt under his boots and a town behind him that was slowly becoming home, Caleb thought maybe that was okay. Maybe trying was enough. Maybe it had to be. Spring came late that year, creeping in through breaks in the clouds like it wasn't sure of its welcome. The snow retreated slowly, leaving behind mud and dead grass and the skeletal remains of things that hadn't survived the winter. Caleb watched it happen from Martha's bakery, where the rhythm of work had become as familiar as breathing. 4:30 every morning. Wood split, oven stoked, deliveries loaded. The routine had worn grooves into his life deep enough that he sometimes moved through it without thinking, muscle memory taking over while his mind wandered elsewhere. The bounty money had arrived in March, $1,500 in crisp bills that the Territorial Marshal's office sent via armed courier. Caleb had stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it, feeling the weight of possibility in his hands. He'd given half to Martha. What's this for? She'd asked, counting the bills with her usual precision. Investment in the bakery. I don't need investors. Then call it rent for the past 4 months. You worked off your debt? We're square. We are. This is different. Caleb had pushed the money across her counter. You gave me a chance when nobody else would have. Let me return the favor. Martha had looked at him for a long time, that sharp gaze trying to cut through to whatever he wasn't saying. Finally, she'd taken the money. This buys you a partnership, she said. Equal share in the business, which means equal share of the work and the headaches. I can live with that. Can you? Partnership means being here. Not for a season or a year, but permanent. You ready for that kind of commitment? The question had hung there between them, heavy with implication. Caleb had spent most of his adult life avoiding commitment of any kind, to places, to people, to anything that couldn't be abandoned when circumstances shifted. The idea of tying himself down should have felt like a noose. Instead, it felt like an anchor. The good kind. The kind that kept you from drifting away. Yeah, he'd said. I'm ready. Martha had nodded once, written up a contract in her precise handwriting, and that had been that. Caleb Varn, Baker's partner. The absurdity of it still caught him off guard sometimes. The other half of his bounty money had gone to different purposes. He'd bought proper tools, a good axe, quality saw, decent carpentry supplies. He'd replaced his worn-out clothes with things that fit and didn't have holes. He'd even purchased a pocket watch from the general store, something he'd never owned before. But the biggest purchase had been land, 40 acres on the eastern edge of town, where the valley opened up toward the foothills. It wasn't much. Rocky soil, a creek that ran dry in summer, more sage than grass. But it was his. The deed sat in a lockbox at the marshal's office, proof that Caleb had put down roots whether he'd meant to or not. Carson had laughed when he'd heard. You bought the Henderson plot? That land's worthless. Probably. Can't grow anything on it. Can't graze cattle. It's just rock and scrub. I know. So why buy it? Caleb hadn't had a good answer then. Still didn't, really. But something about owning a piece of ground felt important in a way he couldn't articulate, like saying to the world, to himself, that he was staying, that this wasn't temporary. He'd ridden out to the property on a cold April morning, walking the boundaries, getting a feel for the land. There was a spot near the creek where cottonwoods grew thick, providing shelter from the wind. Good place for a cabin, if he ever decided to build one. Better than the shack he'd left behind in Red Basin, anyway. He hadn't been back there. Part of him knew he should. Collect his few remaining possessions, close that chapter properly. But every time he thought about making the ride, something came up. Work at the bakery. Repairs needed around town. Excuses, mostly. Because going back meant confronting the person he'd been. And Caleb wasn't sure he wanted to meet that man again. The town had settled into an uneasy acceptance of his presence. Nobody threw him parades, but nobody threw rocks either. He existed in a middle space, not quite trusted, not quite rejected. Good enough. Carson had become something close to a friend, which was strange territory for Caleb. They worked together most days, making deliveries or helping Martha with the heavier jobs. The younger man talked enough for both of them, filling silence with stories about his own past, a farm in Kansas, family he didn't see anymore, mistakes that had driven him west. "You ever think about going back?" Caleb asked one day while they were repairing a fence behind the bakery. "To Kansas?" "No." Carson hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Nothing there for me anymore. Family's still family. Not always. Sometimes family's just people you're related to who don't know you and don't want to." He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "My pa told me if I left, I shouldn't bother coming back. I took him at his word." "What'd you do?" "Something stupid. Got a girl in trouble, refused to marry her when her father demanded it, said I wasn't ready." Carson laughed bitterly. "I was 19 and thought I knew everything. Turned out I knew nothing." "You talked to her? The girl?" "She married someone else 6 months later. Had the baby, from what I heard. Lives a good life." He went back to hammering. "I made my choice. She made hers. That's how it goes." They worked in silence for a while. Then Carson spoke again. "What about you? You got family somewhere?" "Not anymore." "They dead?" "Might as well be." Carson didn't push, which Caleb appreciated. Some stories didn't need telling, but later that night, alone in his room at the boarding house, Caleb found himself thinking about his brother, Samuel, younger by 3 years, with their mother's eyes and their father's temper. Last Caleb had heard, 15 years ago, Samuel had been living in St. Louis, working in a factory. They'd parted on bad terms, a fight about money, about their father's debts, about responsibilities neither of them wanted to carry. Harsh words had been exchanged, punches thrown. And then Caleb had left, telling himself Samuel could handle the mess alone. He'd never looked back, never sent a letter, never checked if his brother was alive or dead or something in between. Some abandonments were clean, others festered. Caleb pulled out a piece of paper, dipped a pen in ink, and stared at the blank page. "What did you say to someone you'd cut out of your life a decade and a half ago?" Sorry seemed insufficient, explanation seemed impossible. He sat there for an hour, pen hovering, before finally writing a single sentence. "If you're still in St. Louis and still alive, I'm in a town called Mercer's Crossing in Montana Territory, in case that matters." No signature. Samuel would know the handwriting. Caleb folded the letter, addressed it to Samuel Varn, General Delivery, St. Louis, Missouri, and sealed it before he could change his mind. He'd mail it tomorrow. Maybe it would reach his brother. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe Samuel would read it and burn it, and that would be answer enough. But at least he'd have tried. The next morning brought complications of a different kind. Caleb was loading the wagon for the weekly run to the mining camp when a stranger rode into town. A woman on a gray mare, dressed in practical traveling clothes with a rifle across her saddle and a look in her eyes that said she knew how to use it. She stopped in front of the bakery, dismounted, and tied her horse. Then she walked straight up to Caleb. "You're Varn. Seems like everyone knows that." "I'm Catherine Stone. I need to talk to you about Harrison Gaines." Caleb set down the crate he'd been holding. "Gaines is dead." "I know. I'm the one who's been tracking him for 2 years." She pulled out a badge. Territorial investigator. "You killed him before I could bring him in." "Sorry to inconvenience you." Catherine's expression didn't change. "I'm not here about the bounty. I'm here because Gaines had a partner, someone who helped plan their operations, fence stolen goods, hide them when things got hot. I need to find that person." "And you think I know who it is?" "I think you talked to Gaines before he died. I think he might have said something useful." Caleb thought back to that moment, Gaines on the ground, bleeding out, asking who Caleb was. He didn't say much, and what he said wasn't about a partner. "You sure?" "I was there. Yeah, I'm sure." Catherine studied him the way a carpenter might study a piece of wood, looking for flaws. The marshal in Denver said you were professional, military background probably. Good instincts. Marshal in Denver doesn't know me. He knows your work. 6 men in a canyon. That takes skill. She paused. Also takes someone who's killed before. A lot. Caleb felt the old wariness creep in, the sense that he was being maneuvered towards something he didn't want. What's your point? My point is that I could use someone with your skills. This partner of Gaines, he's dangerous, smart. He's been operating in the territories for 5 years and nobody's gotten close to him. I need help tracking him down. Not interested. I haven't told you what it pays. Don't care what it pays. I'm done with that life. Catherine's jaw tightened. People are dying. This man is responsible for at least a dozen murders that we know of, probably more. You could help stop him. So could a lot of people. Find one of them. I'm asking you. And I'm saying no. Caleb picked up the crate again. Good luck with your investigation. He started to walk away, but Catherine moved in front of him, not threatening, just blocking his path. Let me tell you about one of those murders, she said quietly. Family outside of Cheyenne. Husband, wife, 2 kids. The gang hit them during a robbery. Killed the parents. Left the kids alive, but orphaned. Her voice stayed level, but something burned in her eyes. Those children are in an orphanage now. They'll probably spend the rest of their childhood there because nobody wants to adopt kids with that kind of trauma. Caleb said nothing. Gaines's partner helped plan that robbery. He's still out there, still planning more, and I'm trying to stop him before another family gets destroyed. Catherine stepped aside. But if you're too comfortable in your bakery to care about that, then I guess I made a mistake coming here. She walked away before Caleb could respond. Mounted her horse, rode out of town heading south. Carson appeared beside Caleb, watching her go. That looked intense. She wanted help. I said no. With what? Hunting someone. Carson whistled low. You gonna change your mind? No. But the word felt hollow even as he said it. The day wore on. Caleb made his deliveries, split wood, helped Martha inventory supplies. Normal work, good work. The kind that didn't involve tracking killers or digging up the past or putting himself in situations where people died. But Catherine Stone's words kept circling in his head. 2 kids, orphaned. Nobody wants to adopt kids with that kind of trauma. He knew something about trauma, about being marked by violence in ways that didn't wash off, about carrying weight that other people couldn't see but never stopped pressing down. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between running from responsibility and refusing to be defined by it. Dutch had said to stop running, but Dutch had also chosen to ride into danger to help someone. Those 2 things weren't contradictory, they were connected. Stopping running meant deciding what you stood for and then standing there even when it was hard. Caleb had chosen this town, this life, the bakery, the people, the slow process of becoming someone who belonged somewhere. But that choice didn't erase what he was capable of, didn't change the fact that he had skills most people didn't, skills that could make a difference if he chose to use them. The question was whether using those skills meant going backward or moving forward. He was still wrestling with it the next morning when Martha found him at the bakery. You look terrible, she said. Didn't sleep. I can see that. She handed him coffee. What's eating you? Caleb told her about Catherine Stone, about the request, about the family in Cheyenne and the partners still out there. Martha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You want to go, she finally said. I don't know what I want. That's a lie. You know, you're just scared of what it means. Caleb looked at her. What's it mean? It means you're not the same person you were 6 months ago. That person would have said no and never thought about it again. But you've changed. And part of changing is accepting that you can use what you've been for something better than you used it before. Or I could stay here, keep building something, not get dragged back into violence. You could. Martha poured herself coffee. But is that what Dutch would have wanted? For you to hide from who you are? Dutch wanted me to stop running. And hunting this partner, is that running or is that standing up for something? The question cut to the bone. Caleb didn't have an answer. Martha set down her cup. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown man. Make your own choices. But I will say this. You can't build a new life by pretending the old one didn't happen. You have to integrate it, use it, make it mean something. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you tried. She started toward the kitchen, then paused. Partnership means I can't fire you for leaving, but it also means the bakery will be here when you get back. If you get back. You sound like you've already decided for me. I haven't decided anything, but I know that look. You've already made up your mind. You're just working up the courage to admit it. She was right. Caleb had known since last night, if he was honest. Maybe since the moment Catherine had told him about those kids. He found the investigator 3 hours later at a way station 15 miles south. She was resupplying, checking her horse's hooves, when Caleb rode up. Catherine looked up, didn't seem surprised. Took you longer than I expected. I was thinking. About? About whether this is moving forward or going backward. Which did you decide? Haven't yet. But I figured I could help you find this partner and decide after. Catherine straightened. What changed your mind? Someone reminded me that you can't outrun what you are. You can only decide what you do with it. Smart person. She has her moments, Caleb dismounted. So what do we know about this partner? Catherine pulled out a notebook, flipped to a marked page. Not much. Gaines called him the professor, according to some witnesses. Never met him face to face, everything was done through intermediaries. But the planning was always too sophisticated for Gaines. Someone else was pulling strings. And you think we can find him? I think Gaines's camp might have clues, documents, maps, something that points to where he was supposed to meet this professor next. She closed the notebook. But that camp's been sitting untouched for months. Animals, weather, evidence degrades fast. Then we better move. They rode back toward Red Basin, taking the long route that avoided Mercer's Crossing. Caleb didn't want to explain to Martha or Carson or anyone else what he was doing, didn't want to see the questions in their eyes. This was something he needed to do alone, or as alone as you could be with an investigator watching your every move. Catherine didn't talk much during the ride, which Caleb appreciated. When she did speak, it was practical, asking about the terrain, the best approaches, what to expect. You've been up here before, she observed, lived here for 11 years. Why? Why not? That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting, Catherine smiled slightly. Fair enough. They reached the camp at dusk. It looked worse than Caleb remembered. Animals had scattered belongings, weather had collapsed the tent, and scavengers had been through everything looking for food or valuables. But Catherine moved through it with systematic precision, checking every corner, lifting every piece of debris. Help me with this, she said, gesturing to a collapsed section of canvas. They lifted it together and found a leather satchel underneath, moldy but intact. Catherine opened it carefully and pulled out papers, maps, supply lists, what looked like coded messages. This is it, she said quietly. This is what I needed. You can read that? Most of it. The codes aren't sophisticated. Give me a few hours and I'll have locations, meeting points, supply caches. She looked up at Caleb. This is good work. Thank you. We done? With this part, but I'll need help checking these locations. Some of them are remote, dangerous. Could be traps. How long? Week, maybe 2. Caleb thought about the bakery, about Martha managing alone, about the deliveries that wouldn't get made, about the life he was supposed to be building. But he also thought about those kids in Cheyenne, about the next family that might get hit if this professor kept operating, about the difference between hiding from responsibility and choosing not to engage. All right, he said. 2 weeks. Catherine nodded. We'll start tomorrow. There's a location marked on this map about 30 miles west. Old mining operation. Good place for a cache. They made camp near the creek, built a small fire, ate cold rations. Catherine studied her papers while Caleb kept watch, old habits settling over him like familiar clothes. Can I ask you something? Catherine said after a while. You can ask. Why'd you really come out here? It wasn't just about those kids. Caleb was quiet. Then, someone told me I couldn't build a new life by pretending the old one didn't exist. This is me not pretending. That's honest. Don't get used to it. Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place in the wilderness. You know, when the marshal told me about you, he said you were difficult, antisocial, Probably more trouble than you're worth. He wasn't wrong. Maybe. But you're here. That counts for something. They fell silent after that. Caleb watched the fire burn down to coals, thinking about all the choices that had led to this moment. Gaines's gang, Dutch's sacrifice, Martha's partnership, Catherine's request. A chain of events, each link forged by decisions he'd made or avoided. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe he was making the right ones. The mining operation was exactly where the map said it would be. A cluster of abandoned buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. They approached carefully, watching for signs of habitation or traps. "I'll check the main building," Catherine said. "You take the smaller ones." Caleb nodded and split off. The first two structures were empty, just rotting wood and rusted equipment. But the third had fresh boot prints in the dust leading to a trapdoor. He opened it slowly, rifle ready. Stairs led down into darkness. He lit a lantern and descended. The space below was a storage room. Crates, barrels, supplies meant to last months. Someone had been using this place recently. Very recently. He was examining one of the crates when he heard it. A footstep above. Too heavy to be Catherine. Caleb extinguished the lantern and moved to the stairs. Waited. The trapdoor opened. A man's silhouette appeared against the light. "Anyone down there?" Caleb stayed silent. The man descended halfway, looking around. Then he saw Caleb. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. Then the man went for his gun. Caleb was faster, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, brought him down hard on the stairs. The gun clattered away. The man tried to fight, but Caleb got him in a lock that made movement impossible. "Who are you?" Caleb demanded. "Go to hell." Caleb tightened the hold. "Who do you work for?" The man gasped in pain. I'm just... The professor, where is he?" That got a reaction. Fear flashed across the man's face. "I don't know anyone called that." "You're lying." "I'm not..." A gunshot rang out above. Catherine's voice. "Caleb!" Caleb hesitated for just a second. The man used it, slammed his head backward into Caleb's face. Stars exploded. The hold loosened. The man scrambled up the stairs and out. By the time Caleb got topside, the man was running into the forest. Catherine was trading shots with someone in the main building. "There's at least 3 of them," she shouted. Caleb took cover behind a rusted ore cart. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. They were supposed to find evidence, not walk into an ambush. But here they were. He fired twice at the main building, forcing whoever was inside to take cover. Catherine used the opportunity to move to better position. "We need to leave," she called. "Working on it." Another gunshot, closer this time. The man Caleb had fought had circled around and was trying to flank them. Caleb tracked him through the trees, waited for a clear shot, fired. The man went down. "That's one," Caleb shouted. "2 more in the building, and they've got better angles." She was right. The longer they stayed, the worse their position got. They needed to move. "On my signal, run for the horses," Caleb said. "I'll cover." "That's suicide." "You got a better plan?" Catherine didn't answer, which meant no. 3, Caleb counted. 2, 1, go. Catherine ran. Caleb stood and fired as fast as he could work the bolt, laying down suppressing fire that forced the shooters to keep their heads down. Bullets tore past him, close enough to hear. One clipped his shoulder, just a graze, but it burned. Then Catherine was at the horses, mounted, bringing Caleb's around. He ran for it, grabbed the reins, swung up. They spurred the animals hard and rode out as gunfire chased them into the trees. They didn't stop for 3 miles. When they finally slowed, both breathing hard, Catherine looked at him. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. Let me see." "It's a graze. I'm fine." Catherine reached over anyway, pulled his collar aside. The wound wasn't deep. Bullet had torn cloth and skin but missed anything important. She pulled out a bandana, pressed it against the wound. "Hold that." Caleb held it. "You could have been killed back there," she said. "But I wasn't." "You took a stupid risk." "You're welcome." Catherine stared at him, then laughed. That same genuine sound from before. "You're infuriating. You know that?" "I've been told." They made camp that night in a defensible position with good sight lines. Catherine cleaned and bandaged Caleb's shoulder properly while he tried not to wince. "This is going to be harder than I thought," she admitted. "Usually is." The professor knows we're coming. Those men were guards, not coincidence. He's protecting his caches. So we move faster, hit the next location before he can reinforce it. Or we pull back, regroup, get more help. Caleb looked at her. You want to quit? I want to not die. There's a difference. Those kids in Cheyenne, they still orphaned? Catherine's jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, but it's true. Caleb adjusted the bandage. We came out here to finish this, so let's finish it. For a moment he thought she might argue. Then she nodded. All right, we keep going, but we do it smart. No more walking into ambushes. Agreed. They spent the next 2 days hitting supply caches, moving fast, staying careful, burning what they found so the professor couldn't use it. Each location brought them closer to understanding the network Gaines had been part of, larger, more organized, more dangerous than anyone had realized. And somewhere at the center of it all was the professor, planning, watching, staying one step ahead. But Caleb had learned patience in hard places. Had learned that sometimes you didn't chase your target, you made them come to you. He just had to figure out the right bait. The bait turned out to be simpler than Caleb expected. They just had to let themselves be seen. On the 5th day, they hit a supply cache near an old stagecoach station and made no effort to hide their tracks, left obvious signs, burned the supplies in broad daylight so the smoke could be seen for miles. Then they pulled back to high ground and waited. Catherine didn't like it. This feels wrong. It should. We're making ourselves targets. That's not a comfort. Wasn't meant to be. Caleb adjusted his position behind the rocks. They had good cover here, good sight lines, and only one approach that made tactical sense. If someone came for them, they'd come that way. You've done this before, Catherine said. It wasn't a question. Different war, same principles. Which war? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, the kind that doesn't get talked about in newspapers. The kind where you do things and then spend the rest of your life trying to forget them. Catherine studied him. You ever succeed at forgetting? No, but I got good at pretending. They fell silent after that. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the sky, turning shadows long and thin. Caleb's shoulder ached where the bullet had grazed it, and his legs were cramping from staying still so long, but he didn't move. Patience was its own kind of weapon. Just before sunset, they came. 4 riders, moving careful but not careful enough. They spread out as they approached the burned cache, checking the area, looking for threats. Professional, but not as professional as they thought. I count 4, Catherine whispered. 5. There's one hanging back in the trees. Where? 2 o'clock. See that lightning-struck pine just to the left? Catherine looked, then nodded. Good eyes. The riders dismounted at the cache, examining the damage. One of them shouted something Caleb couldn't make out. Another kicked at the ashes. They were angry. Good. Angry made mistakes. Then a 6th man appeared. He came from the north, on foot, moving with the kind of confidence that said he was in charge. He was older than the others, maybe 50, dressed well for someone operating in the wilderness. And when he spoke, even from a distance, Caleb could tell the others listened. That's him, Catherine breathed. That's the professor. You sure? Look at how they defer to him. He's not just giving orders. He's teaching them something. She raised her rifle. We take him now. Caleb put a hand on her barrel, pushed it down. Not yet. Why not? Because we're outnumbered 6-2, and the second you fire, they scatter. We'll maybe get one, lose the rest. He watched the professor gesture at the burned cache, explaining something to his men. We need to separate him from the group. How? Caleb thought about it. The professor was smart. That was clear. Smart men didn't take unnecessary risks. But smart men also had patterns, habits, things they did because they'd always worked before. He's going to send some of them to track us, Caleb said. Keep some with him for protection. Standard procedure. So? So we let them find us, deal with the trackers, then circle back for him. Catherine looked dubious. That's a lot of moving parts. You got a better plan? She didn't. They watched as the professor gave orders. Sure enough, 3 of the men mounted up and headed in the direction of the tracks Caleb and Catherine had deliberately left. The professor and the remaining 2 moved toward a cluster of buildings, probably planning to make camp. We move now, Caleb said. Circle wide, get ahead of the trackers, set an ambush. They pulled back from their position and moved fast through the trees, using the terrain to stay hidden. The trackers were following the obvious trail, confident in their numbers. That confidence would cost them. Caleb and Catherine set up in a narrow draw where the tracks funneled through. Good crossfire position. No easy escape routes. The kind of place where 3 men would realize too late they'd walked into a killing box. The first rider came through just as twilight settled. Caleb let him pass, needed all 3 in the zone before they acted. The second followed 20 yards behind. The third brought up the rear, more cautious, scanning the ridges. Smart man. Not smart enough. Catherine fired first, dropped the lead rider clean. Caleb took the rear man before he could react. The middle rider tried to wheel his horse and run, but Catherine's second shot caught him in the back. He fell hard and didn't move. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. They moved quickly to check the bodies. All dead. Caleb felt nothing about that, which bothered him more than the killing itself. There was a time when taking a life had meant something, had cost something. Now it was just another task completed. 3 down, Catherine said, checking ammunition. 3 to go. 2. We need the professor alive. That's not happening if he fights. Then we make sure he doesn't. Caleb reloaded his rifle. Come on, while we still have light. They backtracked toward the buildings where the professor had made camp. Smoke rose from a chimney, fire going, which meant they were settling in for the night. Caleb and Catherine approached from the east, using the failing light for cover. I see 2 guards, Catherine whispered. 1 north side, 1 south. Professor's inside. We take the guards quiet, then we go in. And if he has more men inside? Then we adjust. Caleb drew his knife. You take north, I'll take south. Give me 5 minutes. Catherine nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Caleb counted to 60, then started his approach. The south guard was young, maybe 20, trying to stay alert but fighting boredom. He paced a small pattern, rifle slung over his shoulder, attention drifting. Caleb waited until the man turned away, then moved. It was quick, quiet. The guard never saw it coming. Caleb lowered the body to the ground and checked for Catherine. A shadow moved near the north corner. Her signal. Both guards down. They met at the door. Caleb tested the handle. Unlocked. He looked at Catherine, who nodded. He kicked the door open and went in fast, rifle up. The professor sat at a table, paper spread in front of him, a cup of coffee steaming beside his hand. He looked up at their entrance with mild curiosity, like they were unexpected guests rather than armed intruders. I was wondering when you'd arrive, he said calmly. Caleb scanned the room. 1 door to a back room, closed. Windows shuttered. No other threats visible. Hands on the table. The professor complied, setting down the pen he'd been holding. You must be the trapper everyone's talking about. Varn, is it? Stand up, slow. And you must be Investigator Stone. I've heard about you as well. Very persistent. The professor stood, hands still visible. Though I must say I'm disappointed it took you this long. Shut up and turn around, Catherine said. Of course. The professor turned, presenting his back. Though before you arrest me, you might want to know that you're standing in a room with enough dynamite hidden in the walls to level this building and everything within 50 yards. Caleb froze. Catherine did too. The professor glanced over his shoulder, smiling slightly. I'm not bluffing. Feel free to check if you'd like, though I wouldn't recommend it. The triggers are quite sensitive. You'd kill yourself, Catherine said, if necessary, though I'd prefer not to. The professor turned back around slowly. I have a different proposal. You let me walk out of here. I disappear. You never hear from me again. In exchange, I don't light the fuse that's currently burning in the next room. Caleb's mind raced. Could be a bluff. Could be real. No way to know without checking, and checking meant taking his eyes off the professor. You're lying, he said. Am I? Are you willing to bet both your lives on that? The professor's smile widened. I've been planning for this contingency for months. Did you really think I'd make camp in a building without an exit strategy? Catherine's finger tightened on her trigger. I could just shoot you now. You could. And in the 3 seconds it takes me to die, I won't be able to tell you which board conceals the detonator wire, or how long that fuse is, or whether removing the dynamite will trigger a secondary charge. He paused. Or you could let me walk. Your choice. Caleb looked at Catherine. She looked back. He could see the calculation in her eyes, the same one running through his head. Was it worth the risk? We check the back room, Caleb said. You stay here. You move. I shoot you. Fair enough? Catherine moved to the back door, rifle trained on the professor. She kicked it open. Caleb heard her sharp intake of breath. It's real, she called. There's a fuse burning, maybe 2 minutes left. The professor's expression didn't change. Less than that now. Time's wasting. Caleb's mind worked the problem. 2 minutes to get out of the building and clear the blast radius. Enough time if they left now. But that meant letting the professor go. Meant all of this. The tracking, the fighting, the deaths, meant nothing. He thought about those kids in Cheyenne, about the next family this man would destroy. Cut the fuse, he said. It's behind the dynamite, Catherine called back. I'd have to move the charges, which could detonate them, the professor added helpfully. Really, this is quite simple. Let me leave, and you both live. Try to be heroes, and you die. Not a difficult choice. Caleb looked at the man. Really looked. Saw the calculation in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he'd won, that his intelligence, his planning, his preparation had bought him freedom. And maybe it had. But Caleb had learned something in the past months. Something Dutch had tried to teach him, something Martha had reinforced, something he'd finally started to understand. There were things worth dying for, and sometimes being willing to die was the only way to win. Catherine, he said quietly, get out. What? Go, clear the building. I'll handle this. Caleb? That's an order. Catherine hesitated. Then reluctantly she backed toward the door. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that. She left. Caleb heard her footsteps fade. It was just him and the professor now. Your friend is smarter than you, the professor said. You should follow her example. Probably. Caleb lowered his rifle slightly. How long we got? Maybe 90 seconds. Long enough. Caleb set the rifle against the wall. You planned this well. I'll give you that. Thank you. But you made one mistake. The professor's smile faltered slightly. Oh? You assumed I cared whether I lived or died. Caleb took a step forward. See, I spent 11 years in the middle of nowhere trying to outrun my past, trying to bury who I was. Didn't work. Turned out the only way to deal with it was to accept it, use it, make it mean something. Fascinating. And your point? My point is that you're not walking out of here, whether we both die or just you. That's up to you, but you're not walking. The professor's expression shifted. The confidence cracked. You're bluffing. Am I? Caleb took another step. You said yourself, I'm the one who killed 6 men in a canyon. You think that kind of person cares about a little dynamite. You're insane. Maybe. Or maybe I just finally figured out what matters. Caleb was close now, close enough to grab the man if he tried to run. Those kids in Cheyenne, they matter. The next family you'd hit, they matter. Making sure you don't hurt anyone else, that matters. The professor's hand moved toward his pocket. Caleb grabbed his wrist, twisted, slammed him against the wall. The professor gasped. How long? Caleb demanded. What? The fuse. How long? I don't... Caleb slammed him again. How long? 40 seconds. Caleb shoved him toward the back room. Show me. They stumbled through the door. The setup was exactly as Catherine had described. Crates of dynamite stacked against the wall. Fuse burning down toward them, maybe 3 feet left. The professor had been telling the truth about that much. Detonator wire, Caleb said. Where? Under the floorboards, middle of the room. Show me. The professor knelt, hands shaking now, and pulled up a loose board. Underneath was a wire running to the dynamite. Cut it wrong, and the whole thing would blow immediately. How do I disable it? You can't. Not in time. Caleb looked at the fuse. Maybe 20 feet left to burn. 20 seconds. Not enough time to get clear even if he ran now, but maybe enough time for something else. He grabbed the professor by the collar, hauled him to his feet, and shoved him toward the door. Go. What? Get out. Run. But I said run. The professor ran, stumbled out the door and kept going. Caleb turned to the dynamite. grabbed the nearest crate, heaved it toward the window. The crate crashed through, taking glass and shutters with it. He grabbed another, threw it, another, working as fast as he could, throwing the dynamite out into the open where it might do less damage when it blew. The fuse hit the detonator. Caleb dove for the door. The explosion caught him midway, lifted him off his feet, threw him into the darkness. He felt heat and pressure and pain all at once, and then he felt nothing at all. He woke to Catherine's face hovering above him, backlit by flames. "Stupid! Can't believe—" Her voice cut in and out, fuzzy. Caleb tried to speak. His mouth tasted like blood and ash. "Did he—" "The professor's gone. Ran soon as you pushed him out." Catherine's hands moved over him, checking for injuries. "You're bleeding. A lot. We need to get you to town." "The building?" "Half destroyed. You throwing the dynamite out probably saved your life." She got an arm under him, tried to lift. "Come on. Stay with me." Caleb's vision swam. He felt broken. Ribs, maybe. Something in his leg. His shoulder screaming. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. "Catherine," he managed. "What?" "Next time. Better plan." She laughed, a half-sob, half-relief sound. "Next time I'm not bringing you." She got him on a horse somehow. The ride back to Mercer's Crossing was a blur of pain and darkness, and Catherine's voice telling him to stay awake, stay with her. They were almost there. The town appeared like a dream. People running toward them, Martha's voice, sharp and commanding, hands lifting him down, carrying him inside. A bed under his back, light and sound, and then darkness again. He drifted for a while. Hours? Days? Hard to tell. Sometimes he surfaced enough to hear voices. Martha arguing with someone about medicine. Catherine explaining what happened. Carson asking if he'd live. Sometimes he dreamed about Dutch, about the canyon, about the professor's face as Caleb had shoved him toward freedom. When he finally came fully awake, sunlight was streaming through a window and Martha was sitting beside the bed. "Welcome back," she said. Caleb's throat was dry. "How long?" 3 days. You had us worried." She poured water from a pitcher, helped him drink. "Doctor said you're lucky. Broken ribs, concussion, burns, cuts, but nothing that won't heal." "The professor?" "Gone." Catherine tracked him for a day but lost the trail. Martha set down the cup. "She's convinced he left the territory entirely." "He'll surface again." "Maybe, but not here, not now." Martha stood, adjusted his blanket. "You did a brave thing. Stupid but brave." "Same thing, usually." "True enough." She moved toward the door, then paused. "People are talking about what you did, how you let him go to save lives." "I didn't save anyone. He got away." "You saved Catherine. Saved anyone else who might have been in that blast radius. Saved yourself, barely." Martha looked back at him. "That counts for something." After she left, Caleb lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about what counts and what doesn't. He'd gone after the professor to help those orphaned kids, to stop more violence, to use what he was for something good. And the professor had escaped. So had anything actually changed, or had he just traded one kind of failure for another? Catherine visited that afternoon. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, clothes rumpled, the weight of the chase still hanging on her. "He's gone," she said without preamble. "Completely, like he never existed. You'll find him again. Maybe. Or maybe he learned his lesson and quits while he's ahead." She sat in the chair Martha had vacated. "I'm putting in my report that you acted with courage under impossible circumstances, that you prioritized civilian safety over the arrest. That a nice way of saying I let him go? It's the truth. You could have tried to grab him, fight him, keep him in that building. You'd both be dead." Catherine leaned back. "Instead, you threw out the dynamite and gave him a chance to run. Most men wouldn't have done that." "Most men are smarter." "No. Most men are more selfish." She pulled out a folded paper. "This came for you, from the territorial office." Caleb opened it. Official letterhead. Words thanking him for his service. Notation of his actions, and at the bottom, another offer to join the Marshal Service. He folded it back up. "Not interested." "I figured, but they had to ask." Catherine stood. I'm heading back to Denver tomorrow, making my report, probably get reassigned. You did good work. We both did. Even if we didn't get him. She moved to the door, then looked back. You know what the difference is between you and most people I work with? What? They talk about doing the right thing. You actually do it, even when it costs you. She smiled slightly. That's rare. After she left, Caleb thought about that. Doing the right thing. He'd spent so much of his life doing the wrong things for what seemed like right reasons, following orders that killed innocent people, serving causes that turned out to be corrupt, making choices that left scars on his soul, and then he'd spent 11 years hiding from those choices. But these past months, working for Martha, helping Catherine, making a stand even when it meant risking everything, that felt different. Not because he'd won, not because he'd gotten some reward or recognition, but because he'd tried. Because when the moment came to choose between safety and service, between hiding and helping, he'd chosen the harder path. Maybe that was what Dutch had been trying to tell him. Maybe that was what mattered, not the outcome, the choice. Caleb healed slowly. The broken ribs took weeks, the burns longer. He spent most of May in that boarding house room, reading books people brought him, accepting meals from Martha, enduring visits from half the town who suddenly wanted to know the quiet trapper who'd become something more. Carson visited most days, updating him on the bakery. Place is falling apart without you, he said cheerfully. Martha's working twice as hard. She won't admit it, but she misses having you around. She say that? She threatened to fire me if I didn't fix the oven right. I take that as affection. You would. By June, Caleb was mobile again, moving slow, hurting in ways that would probably never fully fade, but upright. He made his way to the bakery one morning before dawn and found Martha already at work. She looked up when he entered, didn't say anything, just pointed to the woodpile. Caleb picked up the axe and got to work. It felt good, purposeful, real. That evening, as they closed up, Martha handed him an envelope. What's this? Your share of the profits, from the partnership. Caleb opened it. More money than he expected. This is too much. It's what you earned. Business was good while you were out hunting criminals. She locked the door. People like supporting a local hero. I'm not a hero. Tell that to them. Martha gestured toward the street, where people were going about their evening routines. You gave them something to believe in, someone who stands up when it matters. That means something here. Caleb pocketed the money. I just did what needed doing. Exactly. And you'll keep doing it. That's who you are now. Martha started walking toward her house. See you tomorrow, 4:30. 4:30, Caleb agreed. He stood there in this fading light, watching the town settle into evening. Smoke rose from chimneys, voices carried from open windows. Kids played one last game before being called inside. Normal life. The kind he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. But maybe deserving wasn't the point. Maybe the point was showing up anyway. Working, helping. Being present even when it was hard. A letter arrived in July from St. Louis. Caleb recognized his brother's handwriting on the envelope and sat with it for an hour before opening it. Caleb, got your letter. Surprised to hear from you after all this time. I won't pretend the past doesn't exist. We both said things, did things that left marks. But I'm not the same person I was 15 years ago. I hope you aren't either. I'm still in St. Louis, still working. Got married 6 years ago. Have 2 kids now, a boy and a girl. They ask about their uncle sometimes. I tell them I had a brother once who went out west. I don't tell them the rest. I don't know what you're looking for with this letter. Forgiveness? Reconnection? Just acknowledgement that we're both still alive? Whatever it is, here's my answer. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you found somewhere to be. If you ever want to talk more than that, I'm here. Samuel Caleb read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the box where he kept Dutch's letter and the deed to his land and the few other things that mattered. He wrote back that night. Told Samuel about the town, about Martha's bakery, about trying to build something after years of running. Didn't mention the violence, the shootout, the professor, just the quiet parts, the real parts. He mailed it the next morning and felt lighter for it. August brought heat that baked the valley dry. Caleb spent his days working, deliveries, repairs, helping expand the bakery to meet growing demand. His partnership with Martha had evolved into genuine friendship, The kind where long silences were comfortable and disagreements didn't mean division. One evening, she asked him about the land he'd bought. "You ever going to build on it?" "Maybe." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Martha smiled. "Fair enough. But if you do build, let me know. I'll help." "You know how to build a cabin?" "No, but I know how to boss people around who do." Caleb found himself smiling. "I'll keep that in mind." He rode out to the property the next day, stood by the creek where the cottonwoods grew, imagined a cabin there, small but solid, with windows facing east for sunrise, a place to come home to after work, a place that was his but not isolated, close enough to town that he was part of something instead of apart from everything. He could see it clearly, could almost smell the wood smoke from a chimney that didn't exist yet. Maybe it was time to stop imagining and start building. The last letter came in September, just as the aspens started turning gold. Official seal, territorial government. Caleb opened it with Carson and Martha watching. Inside was a commendation, recognition of his actions with Catherine Stone, a note from the governor thanking him for his service to the territory, and a final job offer. Carson read over his shoulder. "They really want you. They want what I can do. Different thing. You gonna accept?" Caleb thought about it, really thought. Part of him was tempted. The work would be purposeful, would use skills he had, would let him help people on a larger scale. But another part, the part that woke up at 4:30 to split wood, that made deliveries in snowstorms, that had learned to be present instead of hidden, that part knew the answer. "No," he said. "I'm done with that life." "You sure?" Martha asked. "It's good money, important work. So's this." Caleb folded the letter. "I'd rather be here, building something small that lasts than chasing something big that doesn't." Martha nodded, like that was the answer she'd been hoping for. That night, Caleb sat in his room and wrote one more letter. This one to Catherine Stone, care of the Territorial Marshal's office. "Catherine, got the commendation. Thanks for that. Also got another job offer. I'm saying no. Not because I don't think the work matters. It does. But I've spent too much of my life being what other people needed instead of who I wanted to be. I'm staying here, building a cabin, working at the bakery, being part of a town instead of separate from it. It's not exciting. Won't make history, but it's real, and it's mine, and that's enough. If you're ever out this way, stop by. I'll buy you coffee, the kind that isn't trying to strip paint. Good luck with the next hunt. Caleb. He mailed it the next morning and felt a chapter close. The cabin took all fall to build. Caleb worked on it when he could, with help from Carson and Martha and half the town who showed up offering labor and advice and materials. What he'd imagined as a solitary project became a community effort, everyone contributing something. By the time the first snow fell, the cabin was finished. Small, but solid, with windows facing east and a stone fireplace that drew properly. Caleb moved his few belongings in and spent the first night listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods. It felt like home, not because it was isolated or perfect or some escape from reality, but because it was his, earned through work and connection and the slow process of becoming someone who belonged somewhere. Christmas came. The town threw a celebration at the saloon. Caleb went, which surprised everyone, including himself. He stood in the corner nursing a cup of cider while people danced and sang and celebrated the year ending. Martha found him there. "You could participate, you know." "I am participating. I'm here." "That's a start." She handed him a wrapped package. "For you." Inside was a leather-bound journal and a good pen, the kind meant for writing things down that mattered. "What's this for?" "For keeping track of where you've been, where you're going, who you are now versus who you were." Martha smiled. Dutch used to keep one, said it helped him make sense of things. Caleb turned the journal over in his hands. The leather was good quality, the pages blank and waiting. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome. Now stop hiding in the corner and come dance." "I don't dance, Lo." Neither did Dutch. "I made him anyway." Martha grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the floor. "Consider it part of your partnership duties." Caleb let himself be pulled, let himself be part of the celebration, let himself belong. It wasn't comfortable, wasn't natural, but it was real. And real, he'd learned, was better than comfortable any day. He made the first entry in the journal that night, sitting by his fireplace in his cabin while snow fell outside. Dutch told me to stop running. I tried. Not sure I've succeeded yet, but I'm still trying. This town, these people, they gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Or maybe I did deserve it. Hard to say. But I'm here now, not hiding, not pretending, just being present and seeing what comes next. The professor got away. That bothers me sometimes. But Catherine was right. I made a choice. Saved lives instead of getting revenge. That has to count for something. I have a cabin now. Land. Partnership in a bakery. Friends, maybe, if I'm using that word right. Brother who writes me letters. A life that's small, but mine. I still wake up some mornings feeling like it could all disappear. Like I'll blink and be back in that basin cabin, alone and half dead inside. But then I get up, go to work, split wood, make deliveries, talk to people, and the feeling fades. Maybe that's all redemption is, choosing every day to be better than yesterday. Not perfect, not redeemed, just better. Maybe that's enough. He closed the journal and set it aside. Outside, the wind moved through the canyon with its ancient voice, carrying stories of men who'd lived and died and been forgotten. But Caleb wasn't forgotten. Not anymore. People knew his name, his story, what he'd done and who he'd tried to become. And years later, long after he was gone, they'd still tell it. Not with reverence or myth-making, but as the simple truth of a man who'd made mistakes, tried to hide from them, and finally learned that the only way forward was through. A man who'd stopped running. A man who'd stood his ground. A man who'd chosen, in the end, to be remembered not for the violence he'd escaped, but for the life he'd built after. The wind carried that story through Red Basin, through Mercer's Crossing, through the territories and beyond. It would carry it for generations, not as legend, but as lesson. That hiding doesn't heal, that running doesn't save you, that the only redemption worth having is the kind you earn one day at a time, one choice at a time, one small act of showing up when it would be easier to leave. Caleb Varn had learned that lesson the hard way, and in learning it, he'd given something to everyone who heard his story, proof that it's never too late to stop running, never too late to change, never too late to decide that who you were doesn't have to define who you'll be. The wind remembered, and in remembering, it offered the same chance to anyone willing to listen. Stop running. Face it standing. Build something small that lasts. That was the whole of it. The entire lesson. Everything that mattered distilled into a few simple truths that most people spent lifetimes avoiding. But Caleb had learned them. And in learning, he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all those years in the wilderness. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not escape, just peace. The hard-earned, imperfect, everyday kind. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.